Morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Sandy, for putting all this together. I would show my video. However, I live in a broadband area, so anytime that I actually show my video, it somehow messes with my connectivity. So, just want to say thank you for bearing with me here. And as Sandy mentioned, my name is Emilio Vaca. I'm the Deputy Director of Outreach for the California Complete Count. Specifically working across the state to work with partners to reach the hardest to count Californians. And so as an office, one of the things that we have been really intentional from the very beginning was highlighting the difference between what the state does and what the U.S. Census Bureau is chartered to do. And what the Census Bureau is chartered to do, their framework is really around the enumeration and the actual process of counting each of our community members throughout not only California, but throughout the country every 10 years. And so one of the things that we like to share is that they're in charge of the enumeration. From the California side, the investment of $187.2 million was dedicated to do early education and awareness. And as all of you probably have heard, it falls within our three big themes of education, motivation, and activation. And so as we have invested this enormous amount of funding across the state, we are really excited and appreciate both the previous governor, our current governor, and our legislators for the commitment for a complete count. And so one of the things that really makes this census different, apart from what we're currently dealing with, is that we learned a lot from 2010. And what we learned in 2010 was three main things. One is fund more, fund early, and get out of the way. And so what we as a state did was we partnered up with 120 partners that range from local governments, tribal governments, K through 12 schools. We also looked at community-based organizations, state agencies and departments, faith-based, labor unions, small businesses, to name a few. And most importantly, we also put our focus and energy around our most hardest to reach vulnerable populations. And part of the importance of this gathering is really focusing on our MENA population, our Middle Eastern and North African population. And I have to say that as a state, we have the honor and the privilege to team up with so many different partners. But when it comes to our MENA, we have specifically partnered up with CARE and their network and the great work that they're doing. And you'll hear more from them in the second panel. But I just wanted to highlight that our success as a state is not something that we can own alone. It's something that we like to share, is that because of the great work that everyone else is doing out there. So as we funded our trusted messengers, as we have defined our partnerships across the state, we wanted to make sure that we really focus on the education about what is the census, the importance of the reason why it needs to be safe and secure. And I know that part of this panel will learn a lot from what does that mean when it gets to redistricting. So I'm really excited to be sharing the space with Kathy Fang on that specific area, because this is a really important as a result of the census. The other part that I really wanted to go through today is why is it important for our communities to be counted? Also, what is the census timeline, new census timeline impact do for not only for the state, but also for our partners? And also, how is California responding as the response rates are taking place? So I will do my best to talk slowly. I have a tendency to talk really fast. So if you need to, just like remind me to slow down a little bit. So let's dive right in here. why counting every community matters. There are three reasons why the census data really helps our communities. One, census data informs how billions of dollars in federal funding can and should should complete our communities. And when I say complete, there are aspects of our communities that don't have sidewalks, don't have the necessary infrastructure built in. There's still potholes that are taking place on our streets. So when we reference completing our communities, it's really getting to that degree of getting that funding to support that. The other piece is really also looking at um, nonprofits, academics, policymakers are also using census data to look at research, critical research, help make informed decisions to allocate additional funding to our communities. And lastly, the participation in the census, and specifically in 2020, it ensures that communities have a fair representation, which, as I mentioned, when we get to redistricting, I'm sure Kathy Fang will talk more about that later. So as we look at as the attributes of what happens when there's a complete count, it's also important to highlight what happens if there's an undercount. And one of the things that, we'll talk about COVID and all the other barriers that come in, but as a result, if there is an undercount, it would mean that communities across the state will miss out on those billions of dollars, not just next year, but for the next decade. For every person that's left uncounted, our communities could lose up to $1,000 per person for each year for the next 10 years. The census also helps fund essential programs and services that have been so critical during this time, like food banks, hospitals, first responders, school lunches, and nutritional programs for our children. And even with our schools being closed, all of those school districts are doing the best that they can to ensure that still takes place for their students and their families. And also completing the census helps us with our essential workers and in those programs, but it also helps us with the recovery that we're going to be experiencing for the next 10 years. In addition, the census data impacts the funding for the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC. It helps with disaster and emergency response efforts. All this funding also helps keep critical programs like children nutrition programs operating. By filling out the census today, we can help California prepare for not just the now, but also for the emergencies in the future, like this this pandemic that we're dealing with, COVID-19. The one thing that I talked with Sandy about the other day is what makes California really hard to count is that the state, specifically California, the magnitude of the state and also the uniqueness of California is that it's been undercounted every census since the very first count in 1790. The California Department of Finance, as I mentioned, as I referenced before, the 2020 census failed to count 1.5 million state residents. Today, it is estimated that California's hard-to-count population is approximately around 11 million people. That is larger than the entire state of Georgia. So when we look at what does that hard-to-count represent, it's like we're literally looking at the geography and the size of the state of Georgia. California faces a number of unique challenges, but I also look at this as opportunities, which include the diversity of our population. We have such a beautiful diversity of California that both makes it really challenging, but also it's a unique opportunity for us to conduct this specialized outreach that needs to happen. It's specifically as we dive down to the topic of today of our Middle Eastern and North African populations. Also with that is also the geography of the state. And it's also the biggest challenge that we have. It is the first census that's being done digitally. And so that does present a lot of factors. And as I started off in saying that where I live, broadband is a concern. There are other communities that have no broadband. And so as we look at this census being done online, it does present a lot of challenges for those rural communities that are even further potentially going to be left behind with being counted. And so that's why, as a state, we partnered up with our trusted messengers to be able to look at reaching out, educating, and motivating, as I mentioned before. And I think that that's part of where our strategy is and will continue to be, is to ensure that we're supporting the 120 contractors that we have. And within that, I know that I can go on and on about the great work that's happening, and you have a great panel, and some of them are our partners or sub partners of our main contractor that's doing work in our MENA community, and they could talk more about what they're working on, and also the challenges that they're facing. And so a couple things that I wanted to go through, and again, I will be try to be as concise as I can, is that with COVID-19 and with the sheltered in place, it did require the Census Bureau to do an adjustment of their 2020 census operation. The change in that timeline does impact all of our effort and all the work that's taking place on the ground. And so as a state, we have made a commitment to those 120 partners that will be flexible, and we will adjust as well to ensure that they're able to complete the outreach efforts to go through October for those that can. And with the new timeline, it does change a lot of the next steps, as I mentioned with Kathy, going through with redistricting. That will have an impact on that as well. So we'll let her talk more about that. But with that, the one thing that I did want to highlight with the change, with those changes, one of the things that I'm really excited about is that the partnerships that we have developed and created over the last 2 years, their commitment to ensuring that there's a complete count, specifically in our Middle Eastern and North African communities. It's overwhelming to see the support of the need to make sure that there's a complete count. And I know that as we go through some of the response rates as of May 11th, I will be really concise here, and I know that there's more other speakers that can add to this, but nationally, as of May 11th, 58% of the response rate, that's a response rate nationally. In California, we're at 59.8, which is really good. We are inching away from our 2010 final response rate, which was 68%. So yay, Californians, for completing their form, even in this pandemic. We have definitely seen the uniqueness of the effort that all of our partners are doing. I would go through each of the counties that I would highlight, but what I would like to do is really talk about why, when we talk about our MENA population, like as I mentioned earlier, the diversity of the state is also the diversity within our Middle Eastern and North African populations. And it's not like they're in one community or one county or one portion of the state. They're everywhere. And so that makes it also important for us to look at how we're going to reach out to all those areas around the state. And I know that our partner, Kara, will talk more about what they're doing. But as an example, in Glendale, I will just be really brief here. In the Glendale area, where the estimated MENA population exceeds 20%, in that specific, the average response rate is at 64.6%. And so, even in this pandemic and what's taking place across the country and even here in the state, there is a great and I would say strong response rate across the state when it comes to our MENA population. Does that mean that we're done? No. It means that even though it's a great response, we still need to continue to do outreach, continue to tell the story of how our MENA population has, like as Sandy started early in the conversation of the call, have not been part of the census, and why we need to continue to tell that story of moving forward. So with that, I know that I had so much more to share, and I want to honor everyone's time, and I would just prefer to have the next speaker go, and if there's a need to do a follow-up, I would be more than happy to jump on another call if we need to down the road. So thank you so much.